In the Time of the Butterflies, Chapter 9, Dede, 1994 and 1960, from pages 171 through 182. When Dede next notices, the garden's stillness is deepening. Blooming dark flowers, their scent stronger for the lack of color and light. The interview woman is a shadowy face slowly losing its features. And the shades of night begin to fall, and the traveler hurries home, and the campesino bids his fields farewell, Dede recites. The woman gets up hurriedly from her chair, as if she has just been shown the way out. I didn't realize it was this late. No, I wasn't throwing you an indirecta, Dede laughs, motioning the woman to sit back down. We have a few more minutes. The interviewer perches at the edge of her chair, as if she knows the true interview is over. The poem always goes through my head this time of day, Dede explains. Minerva used to recite it a lot those last few months when she and Mate and Patria were living over at Mama's. The husbands were in prison, she adds, for the woman's face registers surprise at this change of address, all except Jaimito. How lucky, her guest notes. It wasn't luck, Dede says right out. It was because he didn't get directly involved. And you? Dede shakes her head. Back in those days, we women followed our husbands. Such a silly excuse. After all, look at Minerva. Let's put it this way, Dede adds. I followed my husband. I didn't get involved. Well, I can understand that, the interview woman says quickly, as if protecting Dede from her own doubts. It's still true in the States. I mean, most women I know, their husbands get a job in Texas and say, well, Texas it's going to be. I've never been to Tejas, Dede says absently. Then, as if to redeem herself, she adds, I didn't get involved until later. When was that, the woman asks. Dede admits it out loud. When it was already too late. The woman puts away her pad and pen. She digs around in her purse for her keys, and then she remembers. She stuck them in the ashtray of the car so that she could find them easily. She is always losing things. She says it like a boast. She gives several recent examples in her confused Spanish. Dede worries this woman will never find her way back to the main road in the dark. Such a thin woman with a fly-about hair in her face. Whatever happened to hairspray? Her niece Minou's hair is the same way. All this fussing about the something layer in outer space, and meanwhile they walk around looking like something from outer space. Why don't I lead you to the Anchoita turn, she offers the interview woman. Do you drive? They are always so surprised. And not just the American women who think of this as an underdeveloped country where Dede should still be riding around in a carriage with a mantilla over her hair, but her own nieces and nephews and even her sons tease her about her little Subaru. Their Mama Dede, a modern woman. Epa. But in so many other things, I have not changed, Dede thinks. Last year, during her prize trip to Spain, the smart-looking Canadian man approached her, and though it had been 10 years already since the divorce, Dede just couldn't give herself that little fling. It'll make it fine, the woman says, looking up at the sky. Wow, the light is almost gone. Night has fallen. Out on the road, they hear the sound of a car hurrying home, and the interview woman bids Dede farewell, and together they walk through the darkened garden to the side of the house where the rented Datsun is parked. A car nears and turns into the drive, its headlights beaming into their eyes. Dede and the woman stand paralyzed like animals caught in the beams of an oncoming car. Who could this be? Dede wonders aloud. Your next compromiso, no? The interview woman says. Dede is reminded of her lie. Ah, yes, of course, she says as she peers into the dark. Buenas, she calls out. It's me, Mama Dede, Minou calls back. The car door slams and Dede jumps. Footsteps hurry towards them. What on earth are you doing here? I've told you 1,000 times, Dede scolds her niece. She doesn't care anymore if she's betraying her lie. Minou knows, all of her nieces know, that Dede can't bear for them to be on the road after dark. If their mother has only waited until the next morning to drive back over that deserted mountain road, they might still be alive to scold their own daughters about the dangers of driving at night. Ya, Mama Dede. Minou bends down to kiss her aunt. Having taken after both her mother and father, she is a head taller than Dede. It just so happens I was off the road an hour ago. There is a pause, and Dede already guesses that Minou is hesitating to say, for therein awaits another scold, I was over at Fela's. Any messages from the girls? Dede says smartly. Beside her, she can feel the eager presence of the interview woman. Can we sit down first? Minou says. There is some emotion in her voice. Dede can't quite make out. She has sounded her niece's welcome, scolding her for the minute that she gets out of her car. Come, come, you're right. Forgive your old aunt's bad manners. Let's go have a limonada. I was just on my way out, the interview woman reminds Dede to Minou. She adds, I hope to see you again. We haven't even met, Minou smiles. Dede apologizes for her oversight and introduces the woman to her niece. Oh dear, what a mishmash of gratitude follows. The interview woman is delirious at the good fortune of meeting both sister and daughter of the heroine of the 14th of June Underground. Dede cringes. She had better cut this off. Unlike her aunt, the children won't put up with this kind of overdue gush. But Minou is chuckling away. Come see us again, she offers, and Dede, forced to rise to this politeness, adds, Yes, now you know the way. I went to see Fela, Minou begins, after she is settled with a fresh lemonade. Dede hears her niece swallow some emotion. What could be wrong? Dede wonders. Gently now, she prods Minou. Tell me what the girls had to say today. That's just it, Minou says, her voice still uneven. They wouldn't come. Fela says they must finally be at rest. It was strange hearing that. I felt sad instead of glad. Her last tie, however tenuous to her mother. So that's what the emotion is all about, Dede thinks, and then it strikes her. She knows exactly why Fela was getting a blackout this afternoon. Don't you worry, Dede pats her niece's hand. They're still around. Minou scowls at her aunt. Are you making fun again? Dede shakes her head. I swear they've been here all afternoon. Minou was watching her aunt for any sign of irony. Finally she says, All right. Can I ask you something just like I do Fela? Dede laughs uneasily. Well, go on. Minou hesitates, and then she says it right out, what Dede suspects everyone has always wanted to ask her, but which some politeness kept them from. Trust Minerva's incarnation to confront Dede with the question that she herself has avoided. I've always wondered, you were so close, why you didn't go along with them. Certainly she remembers everything about that sunny afternoon, a few days into the new year when Patria, Mate, and Minerva came over to see her. She had been preparing a new bed in the garden and enjoying the rare quiet of an empty house. The girl had the day off, and as usual on a Sunday afternoon, Jaimito had gone to the big galera in San Francisco, this time taking all 3 boys. Dede wasn't expecting them back until late. From Mama's house on the main road, her sisters must have seen Jaimito's pickup truck away without her and hurried to come over and pay Dede this surprise visit. When she heard a car stop in front of the house, Dede considered taking off into the cocoa grove. She was getting so solitary, and a few nights ago Jaimito had complained that his mother had noticed that Dede wasn't her old lively self. She rarely dropped by Doña Lela's anymore with a new strain of hibiscus that she sprouted or a batch of pastelitos that she had made from scratch. Miss Sonrisa was losing her smiles, all right. Dede had looked at her husband, a long look as if she could draw the young man of her dreams out from this bossy, old-fashioned macho he'd become. Is that what your mother says? He'd brought this up as he sat in slippers in the Galleria enjoying the cool evening. He took a final swallow from his rum glass before he answered, That's what my mother says. Get me another one, would you, Mammy? He held out the glass, and Dede had gone obediently to the icebox in the back of the house, where she burst into tears. What she wanted to hear from him was that he had noticed. Just his saying so would have made it better, whatever it was. She herself wasn't sure what. So when she saw her 3 sisters coming down the path that afternoon, she felt pure dread. It was as if the 3 fates were approaching, their scissors poised to snip the knot that was keeping Dede's life from falling apart. She knew why they had come. Patria had approached her in the fall with a strange request. Could she bury some boxes in one of their cocoa fields in back of their old house? Dede had been so surprised. Why, Patria, who put you up to this? Patria looked puzzled. We're all in it, if that's what you mean, but I'm speaking for myself. I see, Dede had said, but really what she saw was Minerva in back of it all. Minerva agitating. No doubt she had sent Patria over rather than come herself, since she and Dede were not getting along. It had been years since they'd fought openly, since Leo, wasn't it? But recently their hot little exchanges had started up again. What could Dede say? She had to talk to Jaimito first. Patria had given her a disappointed look, and Dede had gotten defensive. What? I should go over Jaimito's head? It's only fair. He's the one farming the land. He's responsible for this place. But can't you decide on your own and then tell him? Dede stared at her sister, disbelieving. That's what I did, Patria went on. I joined, and then I talked Pedrito into joining me. Well, I don't have that kind of marriage, Dede said, and she smiled to take the huffiness out of the statement. What kind of marriage do you have? Patria looked at her with that sweetness on her face that could always penetrate Dede's smiles. Dede looked away. It's just that you don't seem yourself, Patria continued, reaching for Dede's hand. You seem so, I don't know, withdrawn. Is something wrong? It was Patria's worried tone more than her question that pulled Dede back into that abandoned part of herself where she had hoped to give love and to receive it in full measure, both directions. Being there, she couldn't help herself. Though she tried giving Patria another of her brave smiles, Miss Sonrisa burst into tears. After Patria's visit, Dede had talked to Jaimito. As she expected, his answer was an adamant no. But beyond what she expected, he was furious with her for even considering such a request. The Mirabels liked to run their men. That was the problem. And in this house, he was the one to wear the pants. Swear you'll keep your distance from them. When he got upset, he would just raise his voice. But that night, he grabbed her by the wrist, shoved her on the bed. Only, he said later, to make her come to her senses. Swear! Now, when she thinks back, Dede asks herself, as Minou had asked her, why? Why didn't she go along with her sisters? She was only 34. She could have started a new life. But no, she reminds herself, she wouldn't have started over. She would have died with them on that lonely mountain road. Even so, that night, her ears still ringing from Jaimito's shout, Dede had been ready to risk her life. It was her marriage that she couldn't put on the line. She had always been the docile middle child, used to following the lead. Next to an alto, she sang alto by a soprano. Miss Sonrisa, cheerful, compliant. Her life had gotten bound up with a domineering man, and so she shrank from the challenge that her sisters were giving her. Dede sent Patria a note. Sorry, Jaimito says no. And for weeks afterwards, she avoided her sisters. And now, here they were, all three like a posse come to rescue her. Dede's heart was beating away as she stood to welcome them. How wonderful to see you, she smiled, Miss Sonrisa armed with smiles. She led them through the garden, delaying, showing off this and that new planting, as if they were on a social call, as if they had come to see how her jasmine shrubs were doing. They sat on the patio exchanging the little news. The children were all coming down with colds. Little Jacqueline would be one in a month. Patria was up all hours again with Rolito. That boy was still not sleeping through the night. This gringo doctor she was reading said it was the parents of colicky babies who were to blame. No doubt Rolito was picking up all the tension in the house, and speaking of picking up things, Minou had called Trujillo a bad word. Don't ask. She must have overheard her parents. They would have to be more careful. Imagine what could happen if there were another spying yard boy like Perito on the premises. Imagine. An awkward silence fell upon them. Dede braced herself. She expected Minerva to make an impassioned pitch for using the family farm for a munitions storage. But it was Mate who spoke up, the little sister who still wore her hair in braids and dressed herself and her baby girl in matching dresses. They had come, she said, because something big, really big, was about to happen. Mate's eyes were a child's, wide with wonder. Minerva drew her index finger across her throat and let her tongue hang out of her mouth. Patria and Mate burst into nervous giggles. Dede couldn't believe it. They'd gone absolutely mad. This is serious business, she reminded them. Some fury that had nothing to do with this serious business was making her heart beat fast. You bet it is, Minerva said, laughing. The goat is going to die. Less than 3 weeks, Mate's voice was becoming breathy with excitement. On the feast day of the Virgencita, Patria exclaimed, making the sign of the cross and rolling her eyes heavenward. Ay, Virgencita, watch over us. Dede pointed to her sisters. You're going to do it yourselves? Oh, heavens, no, Mate said, horrified at the thought. The action group does the actual justice, but then all the different cells will liberate their locations. We'll be taking the Salcedo Fortaleza. Dede was about to remind her little sister of her fear of spiders, worms, noodles in her soup, but she let Mate go on. We're a cell, see? And there are usually only 3 in a cell, but we could make ours 4. Mate looked hopefully at Dede, as if they were inviting her to join a goddamn volleyball game, a volleyball team. This is a little sudden. I know, Patria was saying, but it's not like with the boxes, Dede. This looks like a sure thing. This is a sure thing, Minerva confirmed. Don't decide now, Patria went on, as if afraid what Dede's snap decision might be. Think about it. Sleep on it. We're having a meeting next Sunday at my place. I like old times, all 4 of us, Mate clapped her hands. Dede could feel herself being swayed by the passion of her sisters, and then she hit the usual snag. And Jaimito? There was another awkward silence. Her sisters looked at each other. Our cousin is also invited, Minerva said with that stiff tone that she always uses with Jaimito, but you know best whether it's worth asking him. What do you mean by that? Dede snapped. I mean by that I don't know what Jaimito's politics are. Dede's pride was wounded. Whatever their problems, Jaimito was her husband, the father of her children. Jaimito's no trajuista, if that's what you were implying, no more than Papa was. In his own way, Papa was a trajuista, Minerva announced. All her sisters looked at her, shocked. Papa was a hero, Dede fumed. He died because of what he went through in prison. You should know. He was trying to keep you out of trouble. Minerva nodded. That's right. His advice was always, don't annoy the bees, don't annoy the bees. It's men like him and Jaimito and others scared that fulanitos who have kept the devil in power all these years. How can you say that about Papa? Dede could hear her voice rising. How can you let her say that about Papa? She tried to enlist her sisters, and Mate had begun to cry. This isn't what we came for, Patria reminded Minerva, who stood and walked to the porch rail and stared out into the garden. Dede raked her eyes over the yard, half afraid her sisters was finding fault there too. But the crotons were lusher than ever, and the variegated begonias, she hadn't thought, would take were heavy with pink blossoms. All the beds were neat and weedless, everything in its place. Only in the new bed where she'd just been working did the soil look torn up. And it was disturbing to see among the established plantings the raw brown earth like a wound in the ground. We want you with us. That's why we're here. Minerva's eyes, as she fixed them on her sister, were full of longing. What if I can't? Dede's voice shook. Jaimito thinks it's suicide. He told me that he'll have to leave me if I get mixed up in this thing. There. She said it. Dede felt the hot flush of shame on her face. She was hiding behind her husband's fears and bringing down the scorn on him instead of herself. Oh, dear cousin, Minerva said sarcastically, but she stopped herself on a look from Patria. Everyone has their own reasons for the choices they make, Patria said, diffusing the charged atmosphere, and we have to respect that. Blessed are the peacekeepers, Dede thought, but she couldn't for the life of her remember what the prize was that had been promised them. Whatever you decide, we'll understand, Patria concluded, looking around at her sisters. Mate nodded, but Minerva could never leave well enough alone. As she climbed in the car, she reminded Dede, next Sunday, at Patria's around 3, in case you change your mind, she added. And she watched them drive away. Dede felt strangely mingled surges of dread and joy. Kneeling at the new bed helped calm the shakings in her knees, and before she had finished smoothing the soil and laying out a border of little stones, she had worked out her plan. Only much later did she realize that she had forgotten to put any seeds in the ground. She would leave him. Next to that decision, attending the underground meeting over at Patria's was nothing but a small step after the big turn that had been taken. All week she refined the plan for it, as she beat the mattresses and fumigated the baseboards for red ants, as she chopped onions for the boys' breakfast, mangú, and made them drink limonisa tea to keep away the colds going around, she plotted. She savored her secret, which tasted deliciously of freedom, and she allowed his weight on her in dark bedroom and waited for him to be done. Next Sunday, while Jaimito was at the galera, Dede would ride over to the meeting. When he came back, he would find the note propped on his pillow. I feel like I'm buried alive. I need to get out. I cannot go on with this travesty. Their life together had collapsed. From puppy dog devotion, he had moved on to a moody business bossiness complicated with intermittent periods of dogged remorse that would have been passion had there been less of his hunger and more of her desire in it. True to her nature, Dede had made the best of things, eager for order, eager for peace. She herself was preoccupied by the births of their sons, by the family setbacks after Papa was jailed, by Papa's sad demise and death, by her own numerous business failures. Perhaps Jaimito felt broken by these failures and her reminders of how she had tried to prevent them. His drinking, always social, became more solitary. It was natural to blame herself. Maybe she hadn't loved him enough. Maybe he sensed how someone else's eyes had haunted her most of her married life. Leo, what had become of him? Dede had asked Minerva several times, quite casually, about their old friend, but Minerva didn't know a thing. Last she'd heard, Leo had made it to Venezuela, where a group of exiles was training for an invasion. Then, recently, without her even asking, Minerva had confided to Dede that their old friend was alive and kicking. Tune into Radio Rumbos 99 on your dial. Minerva knew Jaimito would be furious if he found Dede listening to that outlawed station, yet her sister taunted her. And one naughty night, Dede left Jaimito sleeping heavily after sex and stole out to the far end of the garden to the little shack where she kept the garden tools. There in the dark, sitting on a sack of bark chips for her orchids, Dede had slowly turned the dial on Jaimito Enrique's transistor radio. The static crackled, and then a voice, very taken with itself, proclaimed, "Condemn me. It does not matter. History will absolve me." Fidel's speech was played endlessly at these off hours, and as Dede soon found out. But night after night she kept returning to the shack, and twice she was rewarded with the unfamiliar, blurry voice of someone introduced as Comadre Virgilio. He spoke with his high-flown talk, which had never been what had appealed to Dede. Even so, night after night, she returned to the shed. For these excursions were what mattered now. They were her secret rebellion, her heart hungering, her little underground of one. Now, planning her exodus, Dede tried to imagine Leo's surprise at hearing Dede had joined her sisters. He would know that she, too, was one of the brave ones. His sad, sober eyes that had hung before her mind's eye for so many years melted into the ones that looked back at her now from the mirror. I need to get out. I cannot go on with this travesty.